Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I am your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 15, the novel coronavirus and martial arts. I apologize for having to miss out on doing this episode last week. This last week has just been wild. It feels like Irish Open was forever ago. Like I didn't even get a chance on the podcast to debrief from the results of that open weight, which was a crazy open weight final. You've got Jack Felton, who's been in that Final Four, who's been in the final fight so many times. I was pulling for Jack. I wanted to see him get that win so bad. But then you've got Elijah, who's an extremely talented fighter, extremely skilled fighter. And it was really special just seeing Elijah get overcome with emotion when he actually won that title, because that is the Irish Open openweight is the pinnacle of point fighting, and to see him achieve that goal of his and have that emotional moment was really special to sit there and witness. But anyway, Irish Open feels like forever ago because we have much, much, much bigger news on our hands, and that is the case of this international pandemic of novel coronavirus. So, my goal for this episode of the podcast is two-pronged. It's going to be a little bit of a shorter episode, and I want to address two things. I want to address some of the comments that you guys posted about what you wanted me to talk about in reference to the coronavirus and martial arts, as well as give you some updates as far as what major events have been canceled, and my thoughts on what we can do to improve the conditions at tournaments, things like that, to avoid the spread of disease in general, not just specifically novel coronavirus, but overall. And I also wanted to, as somebody who is 3 years and 2/3 of the way through a degree in biology from Stanford, I wanted to try to parse some of this overblown media information coming out about the novel coronavirus and try to give you as much of an unopinionated, accurate account of what some of the facts are, some of the things that I've seen post about that are a little bit misleading, and try to just give you the facts and what I've been able to learn from peer-reviewed documents that have been published, reports from the CDC, the World Health Organization, things of that nature. I want to start by talking about a recent social media post that I made that I got a whole lot of positive feedback on. A lot of people reached out to me and were very both sympathetic and empathetic about what was going on, and I greatly appreciate that. And basically, if you haven't seen the post, it was a post on Instagram and Facebook that I made about just suddenly having to move out. As a senior at Stanford, I was somebody that was looking forward to, knowing that I had one more semester left and being able to enjoy that, with my friends and take classes that I cared about and be able to prepare for this moment of celebration that is graduation. And for really in a matter of days to be told that you've got to leave your friends and to rip the band-aid, so to speak, and now we're questioning if there's even going to be a graduation at all, or if I'm just going to get an email that says congratulations, you graduated from Stanford, which is anticlimactic to say the least. I mean, other prestigious institutions like Harvard have already made it official that the rest of their school year is going to be done online or canceled or what have you, and their graduation isn't going to be happening. And this even extends to, like, for medical school residency match programs, things like that. There's just a whole lot in the academic world that's been thrown sideways because of the coronavirus pandemic. But one of the messages that I wanted to share here early was, don't feel bad for me. Because I'm going to be okay. Like, I was able, I just flew in today to come and be with family. And because of this, I'm going to get to spend more time with Gabrielle. And that's going to be awesome. So everything's going to be okay for me. This doesn't significantly impact me that bad, other than being sad about not being able to see my friends again and not knowing how long it's going to be before I'm able to see them again because of travel restrictions or what have you. That's the worst that it'll get from me. What I feel more for, and what saddens me more, is like students who had jobs on campus who were dependent upon student housing because maybe they didn't have the money to afford housing elsewhere, they didn't have a good situation at home with their parents or family members or what have you. Students that had recently developed on campus relationships with others, that are now maybe some of these relationships are just 2 to 3 weeks old, and now with almost no notice, they're having to be separated from these people that they found these new relationships with. I even know of one specific case where it's an international student, and so he's in a relationship where they're getting separated, and he's not going to be able to see his girlfriend now for who knows how long, because he's going to have to actually go back to a different country because Stanford is requiring so many students to go off campus and what have you, in order to prevent the spread of the novel coronavirus. I also feel bad for like Stanford housing workers who are having to work overtime, who are having to follow a bunch of new standards, especially like the chefs in the junior and senior housing on what's called the row, which is where basically a lot of the houses there that house students have a private chef for each house, and the chefs are struggling with having to work more hours and having to increase. Their restrictions and the rigidity of how the food is served. Also, not knowing how many students are going to be there because some students just up and left. And so, a chef may prepare food for 50 people living in a house, but only 20 people are there for dinner. That puts a lot to waste, costs a lot of money for the house because each house operates on their own budget. So that creates a whole lot of issues. And I also feel bad for people. I know that there's people who, they were going to be the first person in their family to graduate from college, and it was going to be from Stanford or Harvard or one of these prestigious universities. And now potentially the opportunity for their families to be able to see and respect and honor that moment of the first person in the family graduating college, that's been stripped away from them, and that's what breaks my heart. Is that so? Don't feel too bad about me. Give your prayers and your thoughts to these other people that are in much worse situations than I am. And then another issue that I've heard a lot of students be concerned about is the issue that forcing people to go home, especially on a campus where, like at Stanford, it was confirmed that at least one faculty member tested positive for coronavirus at the medical school, and at least one undergraduate student tested positive for coronavirus. So, on a campus where you've potentially been exposed, forcing people to go home to grandparents, family members that are potentially immunocompromised, you're exposing these family members potentially to the novel coronavirus through these students being forced to go back home and not knowing whether or not they're carrying the virus. And that's very scary for a lot of people. A lot of students were really concerned about, like, I don't want my mom or my dad or my grandmother to get this, and it would be life threatening for them, whereas it wouldn't be. For somebody that is a student in most situations. Again, that's barring some type of an immunocompromised situation, things of that nature. And I'm going to get in more into that and what the risk factors are here in just a moment. But kind of shifting gears here, I do want to address some of the updates that have come from the sport karate world about which events have been postponed or canceled. These are at least the major events that I was planning on attending that have had some schedule changes. The Ocean State Grand Nationals, which is one thing that you guys probably saw me. I was one of the first to report on it because of the fact that we got a group chat. We've got a group text as the members of Team Paul Mitchell letting us know that the Ocean State Grand Nationals is being postponed until July after the U.S. Open. And so we were told to spread the word about that. So I got that post out there and tried to inform people as quickly as possible. So the Ocean State Grand Nationals has been postponed. The Quebec Open has been completely canceled. And the Hungarian Kickboxing World Cup has been completely canceled for the year 2020. So those are kind of the big events that I was planning on attending that have been impacted by the novel coronavirus situation. And now I want to kind of segue from that into um, some of the viewer or listener submitted questions and topics of discussion that were submitted on Facebook. And by the way, if you're a listener that has not liked the Jackson Rudolph podcast on Facebook, feel free to go ahead and do that because that's where I post a lot of the polls about, who do you guys want to hear interviewed next, or what topics do you want me to talk about, things of that nature. But anyway, so one of the first questions that I got, and a really important question, is from Michael Brumet. What does this mean for the rest of the season? And I think his question was a little bit more in depth than that, asking about how does this affect future seasons. I honestly don't think that it affects future seasons too much, other than maybe some additional practices put into place, maybe some unwritten rules about helping prevent the spread of disease that will go into place now. But as far as for the rest of this season, I think the impact is actually really interesting, especially for those chasing points, trying to win world championships, things of that nature. It becomes interesting because now we're putting stress on less tournaments, right? With the Quebec Open being canceled, we don't know what other tournaments, especially we don't know, I mean, how long this pandemic is going to continue, how long is it going to be an issue. It is possible that other events have to be canceled over this. We hope not, we pray not, but that's the unfortunate reality, is that it is possible that we could see that happen, even though I know that nobody wants that to happen. And if that's the case, that just puts, I would assume that NASCA would probably take measures to change the number of tournaments from which scores are received for the World Championships. I think right now the rule is a best of 9. Don't quote me on that, because that's a guess from my memory. I just try to show up and win and do my best. But for the people that are really paying close attention to their points, I assume that the best of however many tournaments would be changed in the event that more than just the Quebec Open gets canceled. Right now, the only canceled NASCA tournament is the Quebec Open. So I think that we'd have to see some more severe, more widespread cancellations for it to truly impact the World Championship race. But the other thing is, it just makes the competitors that much more focused on these competitions that are going to be coming up. And that leads me to the next question, which comes from Kylie Boyer, just about like, how do you maintain positivity during these times? And I think the best way to stay positive and look at it is, now we have basically an off season in the middle of the season, in a way, where now you can revamp your forms, you can come up with new moves. The move that you maybe didn't think you were going to have ready for Ocean States or Quebec, now you can try to have it ready for the Battle of Atlanta or the US Open. You have more time to prepare those techniques and to prepare those big moves for, I think, that what everybody would agree, which is the biggest part of the season, which is going to be that back-to-back Battle of Atlanta followed by US Open. That's going to be the swing point of the season for World Championship races. There's a lot of points that are going to be available there that are really important. And the dream of any forms and weapons competitor, especially, is to win an ISKA title on stage at the US Open. And so trying to make sure that you're ready for the Battle of Atlanta, to go out there and have a strong performance and show the promoters of the US Open and the organizing committee of the US Open that you are worthy to be on that stage, to earn your spot on that stage, and to try to win an ISKA title. All of those things are going to be even more important now. But what I was saying about positivity is, you can look at this as an opportunity to get those forms ready. And that's also kind of the perfect segue into a question submitted by Casey's Taekwondo. And it's, how do you avoid getting into a training funk with no tournaments happening for several months? And I think that my answer for this is two-pronged. Number one, there not being tournaments for several months makes the first tournament that happens that much more important, right? If you're somebody that's, like I've mentioned a couple of times now, in the race for a world championship, if you're somebody that's trying to get noticed to make it onto one of the national sponsored teams like a Competitive Edge, if you're trying to make it onto one of those teams, Battle of Atlanta, US Open, those are going to be the times that the coaches of those teams are going to be looking to see who's got the potential, who's been training hard. And so now this is a really good time to focus on bettering your forms for that performance, not only trying to win world championships or win US Open titles or things of that nature, but also trying to get noticed. And then the second half of this, I think, is, when you train, your training in the martial arts should never be completely dependent upon the outcome of a tournament, right? Because at the end of the day, 3 judges can determine if you advance in a tournament or not. You know what I mean? Like, when I show up in a NASCAR tournament and I compete on Friday night, sure, on Saturday night, if I make it to the men's weapons final, I'm going to have 7 judges determining whether or not I win that final. But at the end of the day, I could get 3 judges on Friday night that just don't like me for whatever reason. And I could get knocked out by 3 judges that just didn't like me or genuinely didn't think I was good at karate or whatever, right? So when you base your goal setting and when you base your training on the results of a single karate tournament, that's not a healthy way to do it. That leads to discouragement very, very quickly, especially for somebody that's just starting competing on an international circuit like NASCAR or other similar circuits. So for me, as a martial artist, I always try to focus my training on the pursuit of perfection, trying to get better, trying to make yourself the best possible martial artist you can be, and then your results at tournaments are a byproduct of that. If you focus on trying to perfect your skills, it doesn't matter when the next tournament's going to happen, because what excites you is when you go back and you watch a video from 2 weeks ago and you watch a video of you today and you see that improvement. You see how much better your front stances are. You see the improvement in the speed of your hand combos or the consistency of the new bow staff release that you've been working on. Those are the things that you should be focused on when you're training, not the outcome of a tournament. So don't let your goals or let your training be dictated by what tournaments are coming up. Instead, be focused on the constant pursuit of perfection, that unattainable goal that always inspires a martial artist to keep working harder and harder. And so now that I've addressed some of those questions, thank you guys very much, Michael Brumet, Kylie Boyer, and Casey's Taekwondo for submitting those questions for me to discuss tonight. I really appreciate that. And that's one thing for anybody who listens to the podcast. Anytime I request topics or specific guests you guys want to hear from, I mean it. I listen to you guys. I want to hear that feedback because I want to make sure that I'm speaking about topics that you guys are interested in. So please continue to do that. And thank you very much to the 3 individuals that submitted those questions for discussion. Now, I want to go ahead and go back into some of the facts that I have researched a little bit and just having a little bit of discussion about that. One of the things that's so surreal about this is I still remember like being in middle school. There was this like stupid computer game that my friends and I would play called Pandemic, and the entire idea of this computer game was to try to like kill off the entire population of the Earth. And what's ironic and a little, I guess, dark humor funny about this is that like we would always pick, because you got to pick at the beginning whether you wanted a bacteria, a virus, or a parasite. And the most resilient thing was always a virus. So you picked the virus, and then it was kind of a random number generator that determined what country your outbreak was going to start in. And you always crossed your fingers and hoped for China or India, because those are the places with the largest population and the largest population density that's going to allow the spread of the disease to happen the most quickly. And so it is kind of wild that it just so happens that this is a virus that has become a pandemic um, that just so happened to start in China, where you have a large enough population and a big enough population density that this can become a real issue, especially once it starts to spread on an international level. And one of the things that is scary about this that I think that a lot of people realize, because I see a lot of like posts that say like kill coronavirus, whatever. Um, from a biological perspective, you can't kill a virus. A virus is not a living thing. A virus does not perform metabolism. All a virus is essentially just a ball of protein that has genetic material, DNA, RNA, inside, as well as some receptors, lipids, things like that that go around the outside of this molecule is essentially what it is. It's just a pack of DNA wrapped up in protein is exactly what it is. And the way that a virus functions is that this pack of DNA and protein will wind up, once it gets into your system, it will attach to your cells, in this case in the upper respiratory system. Then the genetic material from inside the virus is released into the cell. That faulty genetic material is then expressed by the cell's own machinery. So the virus is not alive. It's just carrying this genetic material. Your cell's own machinery expresses those genes, expresses that genetic material, and that's what ultimately leads to cell death in the case of the way that most viruses function, or apoptosis. And so that's one of the things that gets really scary about a virus, is that you can't technically kill a virus, even though there are vaccines, antiviral medications, things of that nature, which is what scientists are working on right now. Another thing that's concerning is this asymptomatic incubation period of 14 days. Supposedly, based on all the research that's been provided from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the World Health Organization, is that anybody can be carrying coronavirus for up to 14 days without exhibiting any symptoms. That means that you could be out in the world feeling perfectly healthy, feeling perfectly normal, and spreading around this novel coronavirus without even knowing it for 2 weeks. And that's a really long time to get exposed to a lot of people and potentially infect other people, a lot of other people with this contagion. The silver lining in this is that it explains why all of these cancellations are necessary and precautionary. There's been a lot of people upset about the cancellation of major sporting events, the cancellation of big concerts that people have been planning on. I had to cancel an entire spring break trip that I had planned with my friends that are seniors, and it was going to be kind of the last big time that we get to all hang out together. So there's a lot of people that are really upset with all of these cancellations in athletics, in academics, whatever the case may be. But the important thing to remember is that it's necessary. Because if there's really all these people that could have the virus that are walking around without knowing they have the virus for 14 days, the potential for that virus to spread is very, very high. That's why I predict, and again, this is my prediction, this is my opinion, this is not backed by any reported science. But based on that incubation period and based on the people that have been confirmed to have coronavirus in the United States, and based on the fact the United States does not have widespread testing yet, so we don't really have a solid number for how many people actually have the virus. Um, I imagine that a week to 10 days from now, we could see a big, big spike in the number of United States cases. But the good thing is that when we see that big spike, it will become much easier to isolate those areas of the country, isolate those members of the population, and ultimately be able to give our best attempt at containing this virus so that it doesn't grow to the level that like a swine flu did or other similar pandemics that the United States has been involved in. Um, Now, speaking of the swine flu, actually, I did find some published research that says that it seems that with the novel coronavirus, each case, so each person with this novel virus infects 2 to 3 others, which is the same as swine flu. That's a bad thing because we know that swine flu infected and killed a whole lot of people, so that's obviously not good. However, it's a good thing because we got through swine flu. We survived it. As a country, as a whole, we survived it. You know what I mean? I still remember swine flu, and I think that honestly, this is a situation that is probably going to wind up pretty similar to swine flu, but the hysteria has blown it way out of proportion because of social media. Social media is a whole lot stronger now than it was back in 2009 when swine flu happened. And I think that that's where a lot of this panic comes from. Now, I want to discuss a couple of social media comparisons that I've seen that I think are a little bit dangerous. One of them is comparing the statistics for the novel coronavirus to seasonal flu. Yes, seasonal flu kills more people, but it's also significantly more common than this virus. What we are dealing with is a novel virus, a novel contagion. What that means is that it's a virus that we have never identified before. And even though we get different variants of the seasonal flu every year, it's extremely common, and so it infects more elderly people, more immunocompromised people, and that's why we see the higher death rates because of how common it is. So we shouldn't kid ourselves into thinking that oh, well, the coronavirus isn't as deadly because to an elderly person or an immunocompromised person, it could be. Now, um, with this situation with the novel coronavirus, we're not dealing with a situation where, in most cases, a healthy middle-aged person would fall ill and die quickly or die at all from this disease. Most people are going to recover just fine. What I've heard is that the mortality rate seems to be about 3.5%. Could be a little bit lower, could be a little bit higher, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not that bad. Because one of the other comparisons that I've seen is people comparing it to Contagion. So whereas people compare it to the seasonal flu to make coronavirus sound like not as big of a deal when it should be taken seriously and should be treated as if it's a big deal, on the other end of the spectrum, people are comparing it to the movie Contagion, which is a big over exaggeration. If you've seen the movie Contagion, which I watched about a week ago, there's a couple of things about the movie Contagion that are a lot more concerning than coronavirus is. Number one, the movie Contagion reported a reproductive rate of about, I think it was a higher reproductive rate, so meaning like more other people would get infected from one case. I think it was like 4, where we're looking at just 2 to 3 here. Which, when you multiply that over many different people, that starts to increase exponentially. So that's a little bit scarier. The mortality rate was also higher in the movie Contagion. I think the mortality rate in Contagion was like between 10 and 20%. Like I said, the mortality rate for coronavirus, as far as we know, is only about 3.5%. And the reason that the mortality was so markedly higher for the virus in the movie Contagion was because one of the symptoms was encephalitis. Encephalitis is swelling of the brain. Swelling of the brain leads to seizures, and that's what ultimately killed the otherwise healthy individuals in the movie Contagion. It's a movie. It's not real life. That is not what we are dealing with. We're not going to see somebody healthy get coronavirus and be dead 2 days later or be dead at all. That's not how this works. The people that are the most at risk are the elderly and the immunocompromised, and those are the people that we're trying to protect with these extra precautions. For the vast majority of the population, if you get coronavirus, you are going to be okay. The most important thing is making sure that you isolate well and don't let anybody else get it, especially those that would be more prone to more severe complications from the disease. So now that we've discussed a couple of those social media misconceptions that I've seen, I also want to talk a little bit more about what karate can do. I've typed up just a couple of measures on a tournament level that I think that sport karate could implement to do better with situations like this and just overall hygiene and trying to prevent spread of the disease in general. One of them is making trash cans more readily available. One thing that I saw somebody bring up on one of the sport karate groups recently was talking about how, like, at scorekeepers tables, judges used chip bags and napkins get sprawled out on the table, and there's just trash all over the table by the time you get to the middle of the tournament day, especially trash that could be carrying diseases. If you're using a napkin and you wipe your mouth with it, that's going to be a napkin that then could be carrying whatever type of disease that you may have, whatever type of contagion that you might have. And this can be easily solved by just making trash cans more readily available. Have a trash can next to each scorekeeper table. The trash goes in the trash. This isn't as much of a problem. Another one is hand sanitizing stations. However, hand sanitizing stations will help if you had 3 or 4 of them dispersed across the tournament room. Absolutely. They're advertised to kill 99% of bacteria. You want to be using the alcohol based hand sanitizers, all that good stuff. However, it is still going to be important to wash your hands. A minimum of 20 seconds with hot water and soap. Make sure that you're washing your hands as often as possible. Anytime you go to the bathroom, anytime that you feel like you've had close personal contact with somebody, even a handshake, something like that. Find your way to go wash your hands shortly after that, things of that nature. And especially with the novel coronavirus, practice social distancing. I know there's been a lot of memes about that, but don't just be walking up to somebody and giving them hugs and all that. Just be cautious with that type of thing at this time. Another thing that I noticed at the Irish Open, I assume they have this at other WACO events as well, and this isn't so much for the novel coronavirus, but more so for any bloodborne pathogen or things of that nature. Is judges wearing gloves during point fighting, especially the center ref wearing gloves during point fighting. They did this at the Irish Open, and I think that this is something that should be implemented across every league because I think that this is a basic health safety measure that's very important. Like I said, it's going to prevent, fighters get cuts and scrapes and all the time, and open cuts that are bleeding happen all the time. And, often the center ref is going to be the first person to be hands on and to be able to help fix that situation. And so the center ref having gloves on and even all the refs having gloves on would be something that would be helpful to kind of prevent the spread of disease from that perspective. And it's also just gross if you're touching blood with your bare hands. But anyway. And then to get off of the tournaments a little bit and to talk a little bit more specifically about martial arts schools, I do want to make one thing clear. When it comes to closing a martial arts school, that is an independent decision for the school owner or the instructor based on your community, right? So how bad is the spread of the pandemic there? What are your local authorities recommending? What policies has the state or has the country put into place that will dictate whether or not you can run your business? My goal in this podcast is not to provide my opinion on whether or not you should leave your school open or closed or what have you, because that is an individual decision that is based on more factors than I could possibly have the knowledge of. However, for those schools that do choose or are forced to close down, one method that I have seen that is really effective is holding online day camps or train at home classes via services like Skype or Zoom. Zoom in particular is really, really good at hosting the group sessions. I used those for a couple of my classes in the last week of school, and it turned out to work really, really well as far as quality goes. I was actually able to even make some final presentations using the Zoom service, and those went really well. So I think that Zoom is definitely going to be one of the best services for you. I teach lessons on Skype regularly throughout the year because I have students all over the country that are training to try to be world champions, things of that nature. So if you're a school owner and you're listening and you're trying to figure out the tech side of all this, or maybe you just need teaching techniques that are more hands-off to use through a webcam, feel free to contact me. I'm more than happy to help and try to lend as much advice as I can to be able to help you during this difficult time. Um, and so those are the main points that I wanted to cover today. I said it was going to be a shorter episode. As I'm recording this, it's currently 2:44 in the morning right now. Partially because I'm still jet lagged from being on California time, but also because I am dedicated to the Jackson Rudolph podcast, and I will do whatever it takes to make sure you guys are getting an episode. Except for last week, because last week coronavirus was getting crazy, and I had final exams, and I had final presentations, and I had final papers due, and it was a really bad time. But now is a better time, and that's why I'm recording here tonight. And so, one of the things that in a difficult time like this, many listeners or friends of mine or anybody that knows me knows that I'm very religious. I'm very much a Christian, and so I wanted to leave you all with this Bible verse that I think is very pertinent to the current situation. It's from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 8. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted but not forsaken, struck down but not destroyed. And I think that's an excellent description of how we should be reacting to the novel coronavirus pandemic situation, especially the line that says, perplexed but not driven to despair. It's important to be intrigued by this. It's important to seek information. Seek information from peer-reviewed scientific literature as it is getting published. Seek information from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, and the World Health Organization. Those are going to be the places that you can trust. Don't necessarily trust everything that your favorite news outlet says, because their job is to make a big story. Whether it's Fox or CNN or MSNBC or whoever it is that you listen to, it doesn't matter. Try to listen to the primary resources to get your best information about the spread of this disease. And then, of course, whatever government decisions are made, you'll be hearing about those through anything, whether that's your favorite news source or social media or what have you. Those things will be abundantly available to everybody. But seek that information, but at the same time, don't let that information drive you to despair. Do not let it drive you to panic. Do not let it drive you into hysteria. The biggest take-home message that I can give here is that mass hysteria is much, much, much more dangerous than the coronavirus at this point in time. So don't lose your minds. Everything's going to be okay. We're going to handle this the right way. Keep washing your hands. Keep doing the things necessary to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. And most importantly, keep training hard, because I'm really excited for us to be able to get back on the mat and get back to where we compete, to where we can compete. That's going to be an awesome time when we get back out there. And I can't wait to see everybody with some new upgrades and some new and improved skills from having to stay inside and just train during the time of this pandemic. So thank you all very much for listening. If you have any questions or further thoughts, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Thank you very much for tuning in. As always, continue to stay safe. This is Jackson Rudolph signing off of the Jackson Rudolph Podcast. See you next time.